Hello, Americans. This is Paul Harvey. Stand by for news. Today's news and comment comes to you from Chicago. And here is the strain. Near Irwin, Tennessee, last night, a tractor-trailer driver... Now, listen carefully. Near Irwin, Tennessee, last night, a tractor-trailer driver lost control of his truck and went off the road and overturned, and he was killed. The liquid contents of his truck spilled into a stream and polluted the water supply of nearby towns. At the same time, 170 miles away, far to the south, near Chattanooga, Tennessee, a tractor-trailer driver lost control of his truck and went off the road and overturned, and he was killed. And the liquid contents of his truck spilled into a stream and polluted the water of nearby towns. Well, stock market headed upward again this morning, sharply higher. Oh, President Johnson in Washington last night addressed that is former President Lyndon Johnson, addressed a $500 a plate dinner, which raised almost $1 million for the Democratic Party. But introducing him, the new House Majority Leader Carl Albert said he hoped former President Johnson would stay around. He said Mr. Johnson had returned to Washington for just one day and the stock market jumped 32 points. Housing Secretary George Romney, as his contribution to fighting inflation is turning back to the government 25% of his salary, and Mrs. Romney says they'll manage. She says they're doing without a maid, that she is putting new hemlines on old dresses, and George is helping with the dishes. President Nixon had 40-some business and financial leaders at the White House last night. We're not supposed to know what he told them, but we do. He sought to convince them that Cambodia was necessary and will accelerate our getting out of Vietnam. He promised no wage and price controls, but he urged them to help fight the inflation war by not increasing prices. The president all but promised a third-quarter economic upsurge. Most of the businessmen came away encouraged. American debt in Indochina last week, 142. That is about 40% less than the week previous, but 40% more than the average before Cambodia. South Vietnamese debt, 734, is the second highest for the whole war. Visiting President Suharto of Indonesia. He's been in Washington, He says all foreign troops should be withdrawn from Cambodia, the communists, the South Vietnamese, and Americans. He says our president has assured him that United States troops will be out by June 30. The General Assembly of the United Presbyterian Church has urged the United States government to withdraw all American troops from all of Indochina within 1 year. Secretary Romney, appearing to argue the administration's case before the Assembly, was given a cool reception. The president's timetable calls for withdrawing 150,000 United States troops within a year. But Defense Secretary Laird says maybe we can do better than that if we phase out America's role of world policeman. Japan says as the United States withdraws from Southeast Asia, Japan will increase assistance to developing nations, but economic assistance only. Our Pentagon's planners, meanwhile, are contemplating removing some American troops from South Korea. The other unfinished war. Maybe a division late next year. We still have 64,000 troops over there. Now, you may have heard a Cambodian source saying that President Nixon used his hotline before going into Cambodia to tell the Russians we were going to do so. That the Russians, in turn, told the communists inside Cambodia so that they could have more time to dissolve into the jungle. Well, White House Press Secretary Ziegler says today that the president did not use his hotline and has not used his hotline since he took office. Our troops in Cambodia have discovered where the so-called communist Pentagon was, a base camp in the Fishhook region, but the troops which guarded it and the troops which ran it had already fled. Astronaut John Swigert at the University of Colorado says when his Apollo 13 mission was in trouble, 12 nations offered help and millions offered prayers. For one small instant, he says, the world was united. Maybe this was God's way of showing us that it could be. On the medical front, the viral theory as a cause of cancer is not new. But today a physician from the National Institute of Health says evidence is mounting that at least one rarer type of cancer, sarcoma, is caused by a virus and may be as contagious as flu. More teenagers smoking, despite all those ads. The number's up 4% in 2 years. Tonight in Knoxville, President Nixon will attend Billy Graham's crusade on the campus of the University of Tennessee. 70,000 will jam that stadium. Graham's subject tonight is youth and rebellion. What to do with prison parolees? A presidential task force studying possibilities says put them to work for the government. Says civil service and the Justice Department should promote the hiring of former prison inmates by state and local governments, thus to facilitate their rehabilitation. Oh, a dance was interrupted last night in suburban Chicago. Band leader Teddy Lee stopped his his baton in midair when he heard a girl's voice cry out, "Nobody move." He turned to see nobody moving, half the dancers on their hands and knees. Minutes later, the all-clear sound of the music and dancing resumed. Oh, a young lady had lost and found her contact lens. Page 2. PM is auctioning off warehouses full of old props. Chap named Abe Shipe, 25, bought an armored car, paid $2,000 for this 7-ton military armored car. Asked why, Abe said, "I never had any toys as a boy." Now here's a potpourri of the day's news from page 3. In Athens, Greece, Mrs. Alexander Fleming, widow of the discoverer of penicillin, denied a passport to leave Greece. I do not know why. Anti-government activities, presumably. There's a bugaboo menacing our high skyways. A real, serious, highly mysterious bugaboo. You'll be flying along in a perfectly clear sky. Suddenly hit a bump. Not always a downdraft or an updraft. Sometimes just a bump. For lack of a better definition, we're calling it clear air turbulence. But it's terribly uncomfortable for plane passengers, and it's suspected of having torn some airliners apart. A friend of mine from East Texas, Earl Hollinsworth, flew into Chicago from Dallas just a couple of weeks ago, and that flight encountered such a bump. Really messed everybody up. Routinely now, airline passengers are advised to keep their seatbelts fastened all the time. Last night, a DC-8 was flying from Las Vegas to New York. It encountered clear air turbulence over Omaha, which sent dishes and coffee flying and passengers. The plane landed quickly so that 9 persons could be hospitalized, including 2 stewardesses, and 4 still are. One stewardess has a fractured pelvis. The other, internal injuries. Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Chase, Jacksonville, Florida, celebrating 62 years together today. London, a longtime member of Parliament, Emmanuel Shinwell, recently speaking of progress over the years, explained that the image of the British body has improved, and he said this is important. He said he never forgave a policeman who in 1890 without justification confiscated his slingshot. Emmanuel Shinwell is retiring at the age of 85, and his colleagues in the House of Lords have prepared and presented him with a remembrance, handsomely mounted on varnished wood, slingshot. Mostly personal. Again, with your permission, I'll be away from this microphone tomorrow only. I have been invited to address commencement exercises at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, but you and I will get together at this same everything on Saturday. Senator Ted Kennedy has testified that for some 9 hours that night Mary Jo Kopechne drowned, he was too much in shock to report to authorities. Today they released a list of telephone calls which he charged to his credit card that night, and the next morning 16 calls, one of which was to Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis and lasted 24 minutes. Washington, President Nixon invited Interior Secretary Hickel to the White House today, their first private session since that letter. I understand Hickel requested this meeting. What's new? Oh, hear this. General Electric is growing jewelry in a chemical nursery. Diamonds, and I mean of the same gem-like quality as those taken from the ground, are being